Hello, and welcome back to Costumes in Your Closet with Kelly Jean from Adult and Teen Services. That's me. So far in this series, we've talked about how to DIY costumes from items already in your closet, how to find them and find inspiration for them, and where to go if those items aren't in our closets yet. And we got some advice from Anna on how to get the best out of our thrifting experience if that's where we're going to add those items to our closet. So it is now time to start bringing all of those items together with our next segment of Costumes in Your Closet on upcycling, styling, and finishing your look. So to kick off this video, we're going to start with some basic styling tips for your garments for the base of your costume. So we're going to talk about clothing first. The first big one to consider is sizing. When in doubt, if you don't have something that's the perfect size, if you're kind of between sizes or you're looking in your closet, you always want to go up. You want to start with oversized things because then you can bring them back down. It's the measure twice, cut once philosophy. There's only so much you can do to add stuff to a garment, but it's pretty easy to take things away and alter it to fit you better. Another thing to consider for sizing is when you go with something purposely oversized, it's going to have more visual impact from across the room. And then another thing is when things might feel like they fit okay to begin with, you want to consider what it's like to move around. If you're going to be walking around all night with your kids trick-or-treating, or you're going to be dancing at a club, or you're just going to be out at a party, you want to consider your full range of motion. If you feel like you can't do this in your clothes, they're probably too small. And when you're making your alterations, you also want to consider leaving a little bit of wiggle room, literally as well. So sizing is the first thing. We talked about color palettes in the beginning as a way to find inspiration, but they're also something you can consider when you are adding to your style. And if you want to choose things that are the same color in order to have kind of a monochrome look, or if you want to kind of borrow secondary colors from your costume inspiration in order to bring in little pops, that's something that you can just consider. You want to know whether you're going for an exact replica or more of an impression when you're choosing those color palettes and kind of where you're going to add those on. Since it is Halloween, this is a time that you can really go for that maximalism. You can do a lot of pattern mixing, some bright colors, things that you might not usually put together because it's kind of a kooky holiday, and it gives you permission to experiment and have fun in that manner. Whereas for something with like a business, you might want to, or your work clothing, you might want to be like a little more reserved. There's no need to do that for Halloween. Go crazy, go as much as you want to. We talked already about using items that are already in your closet, and starting with those wardrobe staples is a great way to go because chances are those are going to be the items that already fit you best and that you've already got on hand. If you want some advice on how to use specifically wardrobe examples in order to create your costumes, make sure you stay tuned for some posts on our social media page as well. This one is a really big one for me, which is about matching fabrics, or at least considering how fabrics reflect light. So when you are doing things with Halloween in particular, you're probably going to have a lot of things that are black. Make sure you match your blacks. Not all fabrics are created equal. Synthetic, shinier fabrics are going to refract the light a little bit differently than something like a cotton, and it might make it look like it's actually two different colors. And then when you're using items that you already own or that are secondhand, if you've been using the advice from these videos, you also have to consider like fading. So things that might have started the same color might end up looking totally different if they're faded or if they're made in different fabrics and textures. And then for styling tips, the next thing we're going to kind of get into is about specific alterations and upcycling. In our second video, when we were talking about what we could do with thrifted items, we talked about just exploring the possibilities of upcycling. But at this time, I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that looks like when you are for sure that you already have the pieces that you want and you know what look you're going for, how we can use alterations and upcycling to achieve that and finish your look. All right, first let's talk about temporary changes. Those are going to be some things like sizing, color, length that are only temporary for the evening because you want to achieve a certain look, but you want to be able to use those clothes again later. One thing that I use all the time, this is like my main tip, is I use colored tape, duct tape, painter's tape, or masking tape to create lines or logos that kind of give a more specific silhouette. Or if I'm doing a superhero, you can tape that out as well. And that gives a look that doesn't ruin your clothes, but is still really iconic from far away. If you have been watching this whole series, you saw that that was used, for example, in the Ghostbusters costume in order to add those lines, kind of reflective tape looking on those items as well. With duct tape, it's going to be a little bit stronger than, say, painter's tape or masking tape. If you're worried about the clothes, if you think it's going to stick too much, something you can do is kind of either rub the duct tape against something else or find a fabric that you know is, I'm just going to start this section over again. So, alterations and upcycling. Let's start with the temporary changes. These are the ones that are going to be more common for items that are in your closet and that you want to use again. So for temporary changes, we're looking at things like a better fit or a specific silhouette, and sometimes some logos or lines that might be iconic to a particular character. One way that you can achieve that, or to add color to a garment, this is kind of my secret weapon, and if you've been watching this whole series, you've probably already seen it in a couple examples, and that is using colored tape. It's a great way to add those things in a temporary fashion. You can do duct tape, painter's tape, masking tape, keeping in mind that painter's tape and masking tape are going to be a lot more flexible and they're going to come off a lot easier. That may be something you want to consider depending on the weather, or if you're going somewhere you think you might sweat. You might want to stick more with something like duct tape that's going to have a little bit more adhesion to it. But if you're worried that the duct tape might be too much for a more delicate item, try finding a piece of felt or like 100% cotton and just rolling your duct tape against that first. It's going to lose some of its stickiness, almost like a lint roller, but it should still adhere to most garments after that. Obviously, if you pick up too much, it's not going to stick and fall off. So it depends on how temporary you really want it. And you can also test it in a section as well. If you're looking at something that's very, very fuzzy, that option probably isn't going to work for you because there just won't be enough adhesion. At that point, you might want to use something like colored ribbon and use a temporary adhesive like hem tape or a safety pin. Speaking of hem tape, that's another way that you can make alterations to the lengths of your garment and that silhouette. So hem tape and temporary fabric tape. Now keep in mind that they do sell both of those in permanent versions. So if you're only looking for the evening, make sure it says temporary or restick on there. Most of the permanent versions have some kind of other step you need to take, like maybe you need to apply heat or iron on to make them last more permanently. But if you're looking for a temporary fix, make sure it says temporary on it. Once again, safety pins are a great way to kind of keep things together. On my wedding day, somebody's bridesmaid dress fell apart and they needed to safety pin their straps back on. So that's something that you might also want to consider having on hand when you go out as well. Another way that you can temporarily alter things is with baste stitches. Now, this is not recommended for delicate fabrics either because it is going to put a hole in your garment because you will be doing a stitch, but baste stitches are really wide. I recommend doing hand sewing if you're going to baste stitch because even the baste setting on machines is just going to put a little bit bigger hole in it, and it might not be as temporary as you think. Baste stitches, though, can be cut out when you're done because they're nice and big, and you can just cut through the center and pull out those stitches. Once again, keeping in mind your fabric, and you might want to do a test swatch. You can also use Velcro as a temporary adhesion method. This is great if you want to add things to a base garment as well. If you want to stick things together as a fastener too, that's an option that's a little bit easier than, say, a zipper or a corset tie kind of thing. Speaking of tying, a way that you can change the silhouette and form of your shape in order to style it better for your body is with just kind of a tuck and tie method. That is going to vary based on what you're trying to achieve. But an easy way to do that for just like cinching your waist would be to put a belt on and just kind of tuck that in, and that already gives you kind of a natural waist. If you're looking to change the length of your garment because you want to create, let's say, a crop top or a crop sweater, a way you can do that is basically put in a false tuck hem. So what you'll need is like a shoelace or some kind of ribbon, and you want to tie that around the spot that you want the hem to land, and tie that. I recommend tying it back to front. And then you want to put that over the garment that you're trying to alter. Just kind of pull that garment up so it's kind of tucked in at the end, and make sure that you leave a nice straight bottom. And it'll look like you've adjusted the hem without making any changes. And you can also make sure that that's a little bit more comfortable. Know that it might move a little bit. If you make something too big, it might slide and you might lose your hem. So if you want something a little bit more secure, try that hem tape. Other versions that you can do to upcycle are just kind of adding things to your costume. And if you want to do that in a temporary way, there's a lot of different types of temporary adhesives. So you can use like a patch stick, a stick and restick, or 505 are just 3 branded versions that are easy to remove. And once again, do a test swatch because you just never want to leave any staining. But that's a way to, like, if you wanted to add a patch, but you want to take it off later. So those are some ways to do it. Keep in mind that when you go into a store and you look at the mannequin, the clothes don't fit the mannequin either. So don't feel bad if the clothes don't fit you, because I worked in visual merchandising for a number of years as a visual merchandising assistant. It is very rare that the clothing is cut and styled for the type of positions that the mannequins are in, let alone their body forms. So a lot of times we will take things like safety pins, clothing pins, rubber bands and elastics, even fishing line, and actually alter the garment so that it fits that mannequin better and it looks better in the display. So you can consider doing some stuff like that as well if you feel like something isn't giving you the shape you want, or it's just not fitting comfortably. You can use that. And in a later example in our next video, I'm going to talk a little bit about, I used a hair elastic to do that in a really fast way. Consider though, if you're going to use like a clothing pin or safety pins, they might be a little bit more uncomfortable, and you only really want to use them for either short amounts of time or in specific areas. All right, so those are a couple of temporary changes. Now there's a lot of ways that you can permanently change your garments if that's the route you're going. So I'm only going to go over just a couple of main categories. You should hopefully know at this point what your inspiration is and where you're going, what look you're going for. So you're going to know what to at least look into in order to achieve that look. But I'm just going to talk very briefly about kind of categories of permanent changes. The first one is cut, rip, or distress. That's an easy way for Halloween to create zombified looks, or just kind of things that are like grungy. But distressing might be something that you actually want to do to your clothes, especially jeans. That can also be something that people do on purpose. It's a little bit trendy. So we'll show you how to do that. And it's with distressing as well, with jeans in particular, it's usually cheaper to do it yourself, and you're able to control your look a little bit more than if you buy the jeans with the holes already in them. So those are a couple of ways. Also, cutting, you can do a lot of no-sew alterations on your clothing by cutting them and either tying them together or using the next section, which is stick. Any kind of adhesive to stick together either separate items or to stick together things that you cut apart and put them together in new ways. There are a lot of permanent adhesives out there. The next one is color. You can change the color of things, and depending on which direction you're leading, there's different ways to do that. So for example, let's say you're trying to just darken something or make it look a little bit more antique. For either clothing or for props, easy way to do this is with either tea or coffee, something you probably already have on hand or can get fairly easily. And these don't require a lot of expertise or specific materials in order to do them. Whereas if you're doing something like bleaching or dyeing, you have to consider kind of your space and other things that you might need to use in order to change the color that way. A way to slightly lighten things would be to use like lemon juice as well. But your soaking time is going to be a lot longer than bleach, and you're never going to receive the same kind of overall effect, but it will be slightly less damaging than bleach. It is an acid, it's just not as powerful. The next one is just kind of embellishment. You can use this with all sorts of different things, kind of going back to sticking. You can sew or embroider, and you can add other things to it in order to just kind of add to your costume instead of taking something away with the rip or cut. And the last thing I recommend with items that you might be getting secondhand in particular, or things that don't fit anymore, is just repurposing them. You can take something apart and just use the fabric in order to create either a prop or some kind of accessory, and make it have a new life. While there are a lot of different types of permanent adhesive, what I would say the most common and the thing that I use the most often is glue. For me, I use hot glue for almost everything. I don't mind if it's not a 100% perfect, long-lasting solution, but it's just something that most items with hot glue do stick to each other. But if you're doing something more delicate, or you are working with different kinds of fabric, there's a lot of different types of glue that you can use for props and accessories and that kind of thing. And I just want to highlight a really great resource if you're looking to use glue in particular. You can go to this website. There is a QR code or the link written out here. And this is a great guide for different types of glue and what they work on, especially when you're working with props and accessories. If you're looking at leathers or plastics, those can be a little bit trickier to find the correct adhesive that doesn't stain or color or fall apart. Or with certain plastics in particular, it can even melt plastics, and you have to start over if you use the wrong adhesive. So I'm just going to highlight a couple of the things from that chart you can find on their website, following it through. A couple of items that are really common when you're dealing with costuming and props. So the first one I mentioned, hot glue. It's the thing that I use for everything. It works great with foam, leather, most fabric. There are two basic types of hot glue, although there are also a lot of kind of decorative glues as well. You've got your high temp and your low temp. High temp is going to be a lot longer lasting, but you also really want to watch your fingers because it will be hotter. And I have, when I'm working with fabric in particular, because fabric tends to be a lot thinner than, say, working with cork or leather, you may want to consider using a lower temp. Lower temp is not going to last nearly as long, but it's going to be a little bit safer to use. Or if you're working with kids, that's also what I recommend. So for most things, I use a low temp hot glue. Other types of hot glue, there's like glitter hot glue, which can be used to add just kind of embellishment to a piece. And then there's also two different types of glue sticks themselves. There's the clear ones, which should stay clear over time. And then there's ones that just look a little bit more milky or cloudy. Be aware that the ones that are a little bit milkier do tend to yellow over time. So if you put a little bit too much and it kind of leaks out the sides, it might end up being yellow in the long term. Also with hot glue, it's hot. So if you're using an item that might melt, keep that in mind. It might not be the best fit for that. And you don't need to have any particular apparatus. With a hot glue, you do need a hot glue gun in order to use it, as well as the sticks to feed. Tacky glue is super popular for all kinds of fabric-based projects, but it can also even be used for wood, paper, or ceramic. A favorite type of glue or favorite brand of glue for costumers and cosplayers is going to be E6000. It is the workhorse of glues. It can do pretty much anything. And that's because that brand not only has really high quality glue, but has a lot of different options, but they're just their base product. You can take a look at this this chart right here and already see that it fits most things, but it is one of those items that you want to check with different fabrics or different kinds of materials, because it can be too much, and it does have a little bit of an odor. So just be careful, because it can also be a little bit damaging to your skin. So read the instructions before you use it. And then the last kind of common one for costuming would be super glue, which once again is super versatile, and can be used on a lot of different things and is really great for prop making in particular. All right, so that is kind of the stick side. Going back to cutting, ripping, and distressing, let's look at this quick image of how you can distress. So these are just a couple of different ways of distressing jeans, and you can see kind of the results based on the tool that you use. So I have 4, this is the same pair of jeans, so there's no change there. The only difference is the item that I used in order to distress them. The first one I used is steel wool. That made my, kind of took off the top layer and made it really soft. So if you're just kind of achieving sort of a vintage used look, steel wool is a great way to do that without adding too much damage to your garment. The next up was the cheese grater. Now, I think part of the issue with this one is that the cheese grater that I was using specifically because it was an extra one that I had that I didn't mind getting fabric in, and I'm not worried about getting all of the fuzzies out. But if I had been committing to this method, I would have used one with smaller holes, and I think it would have worked a little bit better. An item that I used that I was just trying out for the first time because I saw it online was a spoon, which was actually super successful for really soft patches of distressing as well. You can see that that result looks the most like what you would get off of a rack if you're buying a pair of distressed jeans. And then the last method is what I would just call cut and pluck. And basically what that is I did a couple of horizontal cuts across. And then I used some tweezers to just kind of pluck out the vertical remaining strings in order to reveal more of that white string across there. Now, this is obviously the most dramatic change. It is also going to be the most vulnerable piece of fabric that probably won't last that long, but it does achieve a really cool look. And once I got kind of going with the tweezers, I also just switched to my hands because that was a little bit easier. But I did need the tweezers at the beginning just to kind of get me started. If you do choose the cut and pluck method, make sure that your slashes, your horizontal slashes, are almost exactly the same length, because if you have one that's a little bit bigger or smaller, it's going to be harder to pull out those vertical cross hairs as well. My recommendation also with cut and pluck that you mark it out with either like a tailor's chalk or even just regular chalk or tape, so that you know exactly where you want to place it and you don't make the hole too big. If you're going to distress jeans for just everyday wear, my recommendation also is to distress them in areas where they are usually distressed. So things like the hems or where your knees are, or the pockets are another place that tends to look really good from a styling perspective. All right, so that's the clothes. Next, let's talk accessories. Here is a quick list of some accessories that I recommend and that are just really easy to kind of add the finishing touches to your look. I mentioned earlier that my #1 recommendation for impact and styling is wigs. So I'm going to start by saying the first accessory that I recommend is a wig. Think of this as like meal prepping for costuming, right? This is the make ahead of hair and makeup. You can set your wig days or months in advance, and then just whip it on and go, instead of trying to do all of your hair and makeup and outfit together on the same day. Wigs just have really great impact, and they really can give context to a character and a costume. The next thing I want to mention is outerwear, and that's a great way to level up a look and also make yourself comfortable for the weather. A belt, as I mentioned earlier, can be used to create a better silhouette, and glasses are another way for context. Another one is hats or jewelry. I especially love jewelry details. This is an area that you can get a little bit more creative with your costumes. I love pins. I think it's a way to bring in sort of plot details as well. So if I were an Alice in Wonderland character and I had a little teacup pin, that's a great way to make my look a little bit unique and stylish, but also give it context for the costume. Necklaces are great because they are easy to take on and off. Necklaces can also be used as belts in a pinch or even as hair accessories. So that's why I do like necklaces in particular. And then the last thing I want to talk about as we kind of shift from accessories into specifically props is consider using a bag or purse as part of your costume. And that is great because you probably already need a bag or purse. So you can create something kind of unique as well. If you look at my Belle example, the bag that I chose was shaped like a book. But the reason I brought a bag is not because it was shaped like a book. I brought a bag because I have things that I need to carry around with me. So that's a way to kind of make it work double duty. It's an accessory, it can be a prop, and it is functional. And things that you might want to consider when you're choosing your bag, other than just whether or not it matches your costume in color or context, is how much stuff that you are going to be bringing with you. Of course, you've got your phone, keys, wallet, but then you also might want to think about, do you want to have some safety pins in case you have a wardrobe malfunction, makeup if you want to reapply, or if you want to wait until you get to the place to kind of finalize your look. And then if you're bringing any props with you, this is another thing you might want to consider if you're bringing a bag or a purse. Is that prop going to either be able to stick on your body somewhere, or can you throw it in your purse? If not, consider just taking pictures with it before you go out, and that way you don't have to lug any props around with you, but you're still able to get kind of a cool image for the evening. So also when you're buying your props, consider the size and weight of them and whether or not they're going to be something you want to bring around. All right, so I just want to show you an example here of some accessories and how they pulled the look together. So in the first one, it's my Newsies costume, and that bag, which is what we were just talking about, really brought the look together. And I just turned a tote bag I had inside out and used a permanent marker to write the paper thing on there. So it became kind of my Newsies bag, and it was functional because I was able to bring my items around in it as well. And then here, the next one I have is a great one for kind of unique props and how I was able to bring context. For this one, I had the hair and the glasses as well as accessories, but I also used kind of a outside of the box prop, which is just a little stuffed animal version of Jack Jack. And this is from The Incredibles, the second movie, where there's a scene with her in a robe. Also, another thing that I did for a prop was the cigarette that's in my hand, or cigarette holder, I should say, is just a black straw from the recycling. So I was able to repurpose that. Right. So if you're not able to find the props or accessories that you're looking for, one option, especially with a DIY series like this, is to create them. So I just want to talk about two really easy ways, two materials that most people can use to make their props and accessories. The first one is poster board. It is cheap, lightweight, and accessible. It comes in a lot of different colors. It's easy to cut and draw on. And in addition to being used to make props, it can also become accessories if you treat it like an apron or a sandwich board by putting some holes in the top and sides and stringing ribbon or string through them. If you want a front and back look, you can add a second poster board on the back. If you're not worried about that, you can just do it more like an apron style. One con with poster board is it's flexible and wobbly, so it might not have the sturdiness you're looking for, and it is not weather or waterproof. So if you're going to be doing something outside, this might not be where you want to make your props or accessories from. Kind of the next step up in the same vein would be to use foam core board, which is almost like poster board that's got a little piece of hard foam in between the two sides. It is definitely sturdier. It's really good for creating props. It's buildable because it kind of will hold its shape, and it has really crisp edges. Cons with this one though is it's definitely harder to cut. It's tougher without the right materials like a utility knife. It is also not water or weatherproof because it still has the paper outsides, and it tends to cost a little bit more than poster board. So here's some examples of how I used poster board in costumes. So one of them is an accessory. My first one there, I'm a pop bottle. And so I made my soda pop hat out of poster board and a upside down plate and then I just stuck it on a headband that I think I also got from the dollar store with hot glue, going back to our adhesives. So that was a way that I was able to create kind of a bottle top with the poster board. And then the other one is an example of that apron sandwich board method that I was just mentioning. And for this one, it was a group costume and we were wine and cheese. So we've got a couple of different bottles of wine there. With the poster board, it's got 2 holes in the top just to string it around your neck. If I wanted a little more security, I might have done the sides and make it more like an apron. Now the cheese is actually 3 pieces of poster board, and that is worn almost more like suspenders. Our corks for this costume were made out of chef's hats, paper disposable chef's hats, and we just wrapped them in some light felt to give it a little bit more of a cork feel. Earlier, I talked about necklaces. On the slide, you might have noticed it also said lanyards. I forgot to mention that myself, but lanyards are a great way to lend context to your costumes, especially if you create badges or identifiers that go inside the lanyards. So here's 2 examples of costumes where I made badges. I used Pixlr, which is a free version of Photoshop, to create these ones. And my Men in Black costume, I think, was even a template that I found someone else had created that I was able to just change my initial and put in my photo. But the FBI one I created in Pixlr. And that is my Penelope Garcia costume there. Both of these are costumes that use regular clothing. And you can tell from my Penelope Garcia costume, that's an example of where the wig really helps because it gives a very specific look right away. But with both of these, they are using kind of my everyday clothing. So if you see me from a distance, it might not be evident who I'm trying to emulate for my costume. So having those lanyards helps because if somebody gets a little bit closer, they can just read your lanyard and see what your costume is. Even if they don't necessarily recognize the reference, it's something that they're going to be able to identify really quickly. All right, so we talked about clothes, we've talked about accessories and props, and next, the last kind of step is hair and makeup. So for hair and makeup, Wigs Revisited, right? That's another way to save on time and style for your hair. Something to consider when you are developing your hair and makeup style for this is that you can exaggerate for Halloween. Again, think about reading from across the room. So go darker with your makeup. A smoky eye is not only always iconic, but it really works particularly well for Halloween, and you can go a lot darker and bigger with that, and it won't feel out of place. Then when you're putting your costume together, you spent all of this work, you watched this whole series, and you went out and created your costume. You want to make sure that it stays nice. So something to consider is your hair, face, outfit order. Some people like to do their hair first and set it so that they don't have wet hair on their outfit. Most people do the outfit last, but if you have something like a turtleneck where you're going to be pulling it over your head, you may want to consider doing your outfit first and your hair last so that you don't deflate that there. Another thing you could do is put on your outfit first and put either a bib, a robe, or a button-down shirt over it to catch any fallout from your makeup or sticky hair products. Another tip for both hair and makeup is using powder. Now there is specific setting powder that you can use for your makeup to make it last all night. If you're the kind of person who uses makeup a lot, this may be something you want to invest in. If you're not, an easy way to do that for costume makeup, especially for face paint, is baby powder. That's something that's accessible and pretty cheap. And baby powder also has a decent amount of white pigment in it, so it can kind of give you a ghostly look. In addition, it can create the illusion of wear or age on either your clothes or your hair. When you're applying your makeup, consider using different kinds of sponges and brushes for different effects. All right, a couple of quick specific makeup tips that have to do more with Halloween. If you don't have face paint, use the makeup that you might already have on hand. You can also specifically choose to use an eyeshadow, for example, instead of a face paint, and it's going to give you more of a soft look. It's going to be a little bit more sheer. It's going to look a lot more natural. Meanwhile, if you are looking for face paint, but you don't have any on hand and you don't want to go buy some, a way to do that would be to mix pigments from your makeup into a combination of cold cream lotion and cornstarch to give it a little bit more opacity for larger coverage and for a more similar consistency to face paint. And this finish is going to feel a lot more similar to traditional face paint as well, as opposed to if you use your own makeup to create the look. If you are going that method and you're making your own face paints, I recommend adding a drop or two of baby oil just so it goes on a little bit smoother. If you're looking for a slightly thinner application, you can also thin it out a little bit with water, but just make sure you don't go too far that direction, and otherwise you might end up with streaks. So this is talking about kind of whole face paint or bigger areas, body paint. If you're looking at really small areas for details or graphic lines, I recommend that you either use an eyeliner. I really like the brush pens for things like that. Or if you need to create a color that you don't usually have, you can mix eyeshadow directly with some eye drops or a little bit of aloe vera gel in order to create what is basically eyeliner. Now, if you're looking for more like effects makeup, latex and spirit gum, they sound really intimidating, but they're actually not that difficult to use. And if you're going to experiment, Halloween's the time to do it, right? Another easy effect is just kind of the fake blood. Don't waste your money on fake blood at the store, especially because it tends to stain. You can make a really easy version at home by combining corn syrup, red food coloring, and chocolate syrup, and then it's even edible in addition. I would still recommend that you don't put that on your clothes though, as it could still stain. All right, so those were just a couple of quick ways to kind of finish up your look by upcycling, styling, and bringing together your hair and makeup for a completed costume out of your closet. Hopefully you've really enjoyed this series and you've gotten some great ideas for how to put together your Halloween costume this year. If you are looking for specific examples, make sure you stay tuned for the next video, which is going to be 10 costumes in 10 minutes. I'm going to take all of the tips and advice that I have given you over this 4-part series and push them together into a very quick example of how you can use these tips in order to create your own costumes using my own closet. So hopefully those will give you some more ideas, tips, and tricks in order to create costumes from your closet this Halloween and in the future. Thank you once again for tuning in, and we hope you enjoyed Costumes in Your Closet.